We're going to now hear from Barbara Bolt, who is an American living in Japan. She's an ESL, which I think is English as a foreign language, teacher in Kobe. Her activism has been limited to being a donor of WDI or other gender critical things and commenting on Twitter. She's going to cover some of the LGBT groups in Tokyo and gender critical groups and pressure on the ruling party before the G7 summit and some of what's going on in the Diet in the Parliament. So thank you so much, Barbara, and over to you.
This is an update from Japan. I'm going to start first with LGBT groups. So LGBT activism has flourished in Japan for the last 20 years. The first Pride Parade was in 1994, and the Pride House was established in 2010. The Pride House in Tokyo is a consortium of 35 organizations, 15 sponsor corporations, and 20 embassies. There's a building in Shinjuku Ward with a meeting space, a library, and a cafe. This is in the middle of Tokyo. It's the Pride House, and you can see it's on the second floor. And then on the right, you can see the inside, which is extensive. It's a lot of space. It's a meeting room, there's a cafe, and then a library. Looks very nice, and I would imagine it's extremely expensive. So some of those sponsor companies are probably helping them. Okay, so the organizations in their consortium, the missions include running the Pride Parade, which is in April, a film festival, serving those with HIV, activism with sports and the Olympics. Every time the Olympics comes around, there's a lot of LGBT activism, training for companies regarding LGBT, helping LGBT families, education about gender diversity, and more. Last year, a second Pride Center was established in Osaka by Nichiiro Diversity. Nichiiro means rainbow diversity. And this is, again, an organization in the Tokyo Consortium. The founder and director of Rainbow Diversity is a lesbian named Maki Muraki. She's a self-made woman, very successful, a lawyer and consultant, and she set up her organization in 2013, Nichiiro Diversity. The purpose of this organization was to help other gay people, lesbians, bisexuals in the workforce. In Japan, it's pretty rough working. It's long hours. There's a lot of harassment sometimes and bullying. So that was her objective, was to stop that. And because of her, they have made a lot of policies to prevent that. So she has made progress. I think transgender also goes along with that. She says that the percentage in Japan is about 5%, which usually it's 10%. So I believe a lot of people have not come out yet. Because, let me see. However, she uses cis, she uses pronouns. Also, I saw a TED talk that she did, and it's obvious she doesn't know about sports science. She thinks that men and women can compete together and it's perfectly fair. As the G7 was approaching, I opened up the newspaper, the Japanese newspaper we have, and here is a big picture with Ms. Muraki and a French embassy official at the Pride Center in Osaka. Each was holding a transgender flag. It became apparent to me that the press is also woke. I admire some things about Ms. Muraki, but like those in the West, she refuses to see a big part of the picture. Pride Center Osaka is run by Queer Women's Research Center. And not only that, it has a gender-neutral bathroom. The two Pride Centers have strong ties with foreign diplomats. So the next thing is the gender critical group, which is called Save Women's Space Japan. It's a women's symbol with a bunch of leaves around it. And I wondered about the significance of those leaves. And I contacted them, but they said there was nothing in particular about the leaves. But it is a beautiful logo. And their purpose is to they have regular meetings with politicians, Zoom presentations, and press conferences. Their objective is to point out the harm of gender self-identity to politicians regarding the Japanese public and to support women's spaces and rights. On May 1st, Save Women's Spaces had a press conference at Japan National Press Club. One of the speakers, Natsuko Mori, told of the trouble the lesbian community has faced from males who identify as lesbians. Another speaker, well, they had a press conference and it was a very long table. They had about 7 speakers. And Michiko Orita was the other one, this other speaker. She is from Tokyo's Rape Crisis Center, which is a consultation center. And she said that her center had been disqualified for a government grant from the Minato City Center for Gender Equality. The director of the center was displeased that she had used the terms trans women instead of women in the rape center's newsletter. We can now see how things are set up here to favor trans activists. It seems that the government gives funds to Minato City Center for gender equality to be dispersed to organizations in the community, the LGBT community in Minato Ward, which is a section of Tokyo. But only those that support trans ideology need apply. The women at the rape center are left out. Save Women's Spaces is fortunate to work with a lawyer, Taro Takimoto, who truly has Japanese women's interest at heart. He's fighting to defeat the LGBT bill, and his office is also used by Save Women's Spaces. Okay, the next thing is the Japanese government. Very simple explanation. The Japanese government is made up of one big party, which is usually the ruling party, and the other small parties or opposition parties. The big party is called the Liberal Democratic Party, but it is anything but liberal. They are very conservative. They are against LGBT rights, including same-sex marriage and gender self-ID. The other parties are for same-sex marriage and gender self-ID. In most places in Japan, LGBTQ plus is a package. It's either all or nothing, except that there's one thing that's different in Japan. A transgender person must go through therapy and operations to render themselves sterile before they can change their registration and present as the opposite sex. This the ruling party approves of. With this law in place, the number of people in Japan who are recognized as the opposite sex was around 10,000 as of 2020. With the sterilization law, the possibility of trans ID females giving birth is avoided, and the prospect of parents trying to be named as the opposite sex parent is also prevented. That doesn't take away the fact that there is a lot of suffering because of these mandatory surgeries. Especially, there are a lot of female to male transgender people, and those females have to have a hysterectomy. It's pretty rough. The rule, referred to as GID, Gender Identity Disorder and Special Cases Act, has been enforced for 20 years. It shows that in addition to basic prejudice toward LGBT people, the ruling party has known the dangers of self-ID for a long time. So that was the background, and now the G7 summit. With the upcoming G7 summit, there was considerable activism to get the LGBT bill passed. This bill was made 2 years ago when the Olympics happened, and it's extreme. It has gender self-ID. It has teaching in the schools. But the ruling party has never liked it. Three leading LGBT groups, Marriage for All Japan, the Japan Alliance for LGBT Legislation, and Human Rights Watch, formed a focus group before the G7 summit called Pride 7. On March 30th, Pride 7 held their own summit in Tokyo, a roundtable with representatives from government and embassies attended. An effort was made to gain acceptance for the LGBT bill. One guest speaker from the ruling party said that the Diet was working hard for the enactment of the bill. Trans activists in Japan have also had some help from abroad. More than anyone, the American ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, has been pushing for passage of the bill. He had the 6 other ambassadors from the G7 to sign a joint private letter to the Japanese Prime Minister, citing the lack of LGBT rights. He spent a lot of time at events such as Pride Parade and Pride 7 Summit with Prime Minister Kishida's aide, who is thoroughly behind the bill. On Twitter, he had this to say: "The equality countdown begins now. It's time for a new era where members of the LGBTQI+ feel at home in Japan and America. And we support universal human rights for all." Meanwhile, where this is going on, the ruling party was revising the LGBT bill. Where it said end discrimination, they changed it to end unjust discrimination. And gender self-ID was changed to back to the way they have it, the GID, requiring surgeries. And finally, the clause involving LGBT education in schools was removed. They felt that if the bill without revision was passed, there would be problems with men accessing women's restrooms and public baths. So this is one thing where Japan is different, the public baths. Like in Tokyo, there's a lot of, they're called osento, they're like mom and pop small bathhouses. And so they're afraid that men will go into them. One prominent conservative politician said that it's wrong to protect a minority at the expense of the majority. And I think he meant women by that. They seem to have an idea of what would happen if they passed full LGBT rights. So then the summit was coming up as of May 16, 3 days before the G7. The ruling party and the second largest party, Komeito, agreed on a revised LGBT bill. And this was on the revised bill. And this was presented to the Diet on May 18. As the smaller parties were unhappy with this bill, now revised, they refused to deliberate and vote on it. So in the end, the bill was presented and then shelved. The ruling party felt satisfied that they had done just enough to appease the other countries in the G7. But of course, the LGBT community and allies were not happy with this outcome. On the other hand, the ruling party had many emails and phone calls from angry constituents decrying the bill. Because of Japan's conservative nature, gender ID may not take root here, even with all the outside pressure. So, what did Rahm Emanuel have to say about the outcome of the LGBT bill? After his overly optimistic messages on Twitter, he had this to say: "Today's introduction of an LGBTQI+ awareness bill is a significant step in a long journey for equity for all. I thank the Japanese public for supporting equality and seeking change." It's unclear to me what he's happy about, as the bill was not deliberated, voted on, or passed. Perhaps he's just being strategic as the ambassador, waiting for his next chance. This time, women in Japan have been spared gender self-ID. On the other hand, gays and lesbians and bisexuals have been denied same-sex marriage. The Diet will continue to discuss the bill until the end of the session, which is June 21st. After the G7, one of the small parties, the Democratic Party for the People, considered changing the bill to protect cisgender people. They're getting there. Probably nothing will come of this, but it shows that lawmakers are beginning to wake up to the harms of gender self-ID. This and the conservative nature of Japanese lawmakers means that the LGBT bill will remain on the shelf for a long time to come. Okay, I have some updates from today. I have a source in Tokyo that sent me some updates. On June 16, the Supreme Court of Japan will hand down a judgment as to whether a trans-identified male can use the women's toilets in the government building where he's employed. The previous judgments have been split. This is fantastic. This woman has come out of nowhere. Suddenly she was at the train stations handing out leaflets, and she has a megaphone and she's making speeches. Her name is Moe Fukada, and her mission is to protect women's toilets. She's organizing an all women's conference, and there's an ad right here is at the bottom. That's the ad for the conference. On June 3rd, because of her and others, there are many concerns about the LGBT bill in various publications. So people are waking up here. I would like to thank a woman in Tokyo for helping me do this. It really, her effort really helped me. And she's an awesome activist who can assemble information at the speed of light. Okay, that's all.